I thought I'd talk to you guys today about the MARLAB project. I'll start with a bit more of an introduction. So I'm Simon Hindley. I'm a naval architect, as Dimitri said. Solis Marine Consultants have been working the sort of salvage shipping incident sector for some time, and there's a mixture of master mariners and naval architects there. So quite a lot of practical experience of coal regs and lots of work pulling out data from voyage data recorders, things like that, to support court cases. I work heading up the marine engineering side of business, which is more on the sort of design and analysis topics, and together we partnered up with Maritime to support the UK MCA with their MARLAB project. So kicking off, what is MARLAB as a good start? So the MARLAB project was set up by the MCA about a year ago. It was a Innovate UK funded project where they applied for some funding through the Regulators Pioneers Fund. Their whole project had two main work streams, one being regulatory and the other being of the data side of things. Now our work was on the data side, but I'll touch on the regulatory side of things as well, because it performs an interesting backdrop, and it's certainly all part of the picture, as these two parallel strands are very much connected. And as part of that ongoing work, there were several workshops and feedback sessions with quite a lot of stakeholders across the industry, ranging from insurers, P&I clubs, through to operators, manufacturers, academics, across the whole sort of board. So it gave us a really good picture across the piece. Now the project was sort of bounded, as it's for the UK MCA. It was looking at UK operations, so in territorial waters, domestic waters, and vessels under 24 metres in length. So very much hitting the sort of workboat code and equivalents there. Now, part of the regulatory part was looking at sort of mapping out the various regulations and requirements there. Twofold really. One, to see if there were any barriers for adoption of marine autonomous surface ships, or MAS as they use the acronym, both at the domestic UK angle but also on the international side of it. So I'll go through these little diagrams so you can see a summary of there in a moment. If we look at the international one, for example, so it's pulling out SOLAS, IMO, UNCLOS, all the usual sort of things that will spring to our minds, IALA, etc. And the areas highlighted in red are those where there could be some challenges for adopting autonomous surface vessels. Now, this legal review part of the regulatory framework was performed by the National Oceanography Centre, the NOC, and there's still some ongoing work there with it, but it's been useful in terms of seeing where potential barriers are. And all of this information that we've been working on gets fed back to the MCA for their future decision making. So that's a quick summary of the international piece. Then looking at the domestic UK side of things, similar story, red showing potential challenges. The MCA Code, Pilotage Act, all these sorts of things, Merchant Shipping Act, all classic things which we won't form as a main topic for today from our side of things. But like I said, it's very much part of it. That's actually another thing to add, Dimitri. If anybody has any questions after the presentation today, then please feel free to contact Dimitri. I'm happy for him to share my email and contact details with everyone. So yeah, building on that in terms of the regulatory backdrop, then we were then looking more at the data side of things. So this is now looking at what data is held by the UK government. So involved work with the UK Hydrographic Office, with the Met Office, also with academic institutions, ports and harbours, a whole range of stakeholders, and we pulled all that together. Now, what I thought I'd do with this presentation is kind of do a quick flip around and actually start at the end. So I'll show you what we did, and then we'll go through the steps and how we got there. So just to break with the convention a little. Now this next slide is going to have some video. If it does start to stutter, let me know, and what I'll do is just pause the frames and then I can talk through them. So we'll see how we go. So this was the MARLAB site. It's should be playing hopefully. So MARLAB website, it's basically a dashboard that's showing a range of different data sets, their sources. So when it's last been refreshed, this is picking up AIS data, for instance. This is all around the Portland Harbour area. So every hour it's vetting how many signals we're getting in. And then we've got the metocean data for the site, both in terms of wind speeds, wind directions from a couple of shore-based anemometers. And then also the forecast data, and that's all come from the UK Met Office. So again, it's very comprehensive, important things such as visibility, etc. And then from the UK Hydrographic Office, the actual data in terms of bathymetry data and other data we've got. Now, in terms of accessing it, it's an API access. We put together some examples for people so it's easy for them to use it. This particular one is going through the 30 seconds of AIS data extracted for the area. And it just goes through the commands so that people can use it. So it's very much drilled in at the API sort of end of things. And then this is that same 30 minutes of data, just replayed on our own proprietary platform, but the data can be replayed on many different formats, different methods. Now, in terms of our access there, we used API methods basically, with a view that it fills two needs. One being the actual systems developers. So if they've got a platform on the water and it's wanting to call up live data for that platform, then the API route is what we've picked up for that, so we could do that efficiently. But the converse side of that is it's not so easy from a planning point of view. So if people are looking at doing operations at a different site over different times of the year, perhaps looking at the heat maps, so like when busy shipping's happening, things like that, then perhaps it's not the best way. And we'll come back onto some of the feedback stages a bit later on in the presentation. Now, how did we get there? We had two phases. So first one was a stakeholder engagement phase to determine what their requirements were. That was first stage, and then we developed the platform, released it for testing. The testing was from December last year until March this year, and then we kept the program online for a couple more months until the end of May, so that people could continue to use it and evaluate it. Now, after that testing and feedback phase, sort of partway through, we then had some interim feedback from everyone that was using the portal when we went to go and see them or to meet with them online, as some of the coronavirus restrictions were starting to happen at that point. So we could get their feedback in terms of what they're using the platform for, what they liked, what they would like to have changed, and to use that as part of the mechanism for feeding back to the MCA. And yeah, there's certainly some from that first round, so the sort of requirements round, we had some very good feedback from everybody, really. It's really useful. There are certainly some standout sort of points, and some were people would like to see much larger geographic coverage. Also, we had an immediate request that some undergraduate training programs could use this as part of the sort of marine survey courses that they're running. and then also for future workshops in terms of the MCA Department for Transport and how they can support MAS, because that was certainly one of the sort of overarching bits of feedback was trying to improve that engagement, and that's been sort of part of the reason for this work that we've been doing as well. Now moving into that initial stage, so where we spoke to these sort of range of stakeholders. I won't go through all 16 questions, that could be a little bit tedious, but I'll just go through the sort of the top level ones, which kind of helped us in terms of forming what data everybody wanted to see in that hub, and sort of found out the requirements there. Now, in terms of the breakdown of who's a manufacturer, software integrator, MAS owner, port or harbour, academic institution, operator, etc., that kind of gives a bit of an overview of that. So, we had a fairly decent coverage there across the sector. And then we had a look at those in a bit more depth in terms of what's their actual involvement. Are they actively engaged in the MAS sector, or are they something that they're looking to get involved in, and a sliding scale between the two? And so again, we had a nice range there. It wasn't too skewed one way or the other. Now, looking at question 3, what we asked them to do is go through those data types and rank them in order of priority and suggest alternatives as well. And this is the tally that we pulled together from that. So you could see quite a lot of people are bringing sort of AIS data up to a pretty high priority, port calls in terms of historical and future applications, but a lot of it was metocean data. So in terms of tidal data, bathymetry data, port and harbour limits, things like the notice to mariners, very much different. Notice to mariners is a good example there. They're typically issued on the local port's website in varying different formats, so it's not really a machine readable sort of data point. So we're starting to think about, well, there might be an option there for trying to standardize that reporting system and therefore make that machine readable, and then the various platforms either in the planning or operating stages can bring these in. It makes it a bit more agnostic from site to site as well. That's certainly one of the MCA's requirements, is to have something that was as all-encompassing as possible. Now, moving those into the priority order from that set of tallies, that's what we ended up with. So AIS data seems to be right at the very top, running through them with the metocean data, and then coming into after the metocean data, in terms of other shipping movements, that's useful, but it was also radar and visual imagery, so the sort of shoreline. So when autonomous platforms are using their cameras as part of their sort of collision avoidance or secondary sort of navigation systems, and having that terrain model of the nearshore area, both visually and as a point cloud, say from some of the LiDAR surveys and things like that are done. That was all in there as well. So it was there was a pretty big data ask, so there's quite a lot. Now, our original scope was to provide the AIS data, which the MCA held, and then hopefully a bit more. So we went as far down that list as we could. So we pulled in the AIS data, metocean data, hydrographic data, and then also local ports data as well. Now, we didn't have time, unfortunately, to do the sort of post-processing on the radar data. We could bring in radar data as an image, but not in terms of the image processing to turn that into vessel trajectories and vectors. But certainly that first round, that forming of the requirements, there's a few sort of overarching bits of feedback that cut across quite a lot of the different stakeholders. So where there's a bit of an accord forming, and these are some of them which we got up on the screen in front of us. So one was the engagements. It didn't feel that it was quite there at the moment. Licensing for trials, something they've been struggling with, and something that the MCA are aware of as well. So in terms of the numbers of people that they have So we want to try to standardize things to make the most of the resources that they have, and that's kind of where they get into a bit of a sticking point potentially. But ultimately, you know, for the MAS sector, they want that that holy grail, that 100% reliable tracking and identification of everything around it. And there's always going to be a, you know, that's a goal, but you can never quite get there. But in terms of doing your best sort of ALARP principles to get there, that's certainly the ongoing side of things. So that sort of formed the requirements for the data hub. Then we pulled together the actual infrastructure for all this data. Sorry, it's all very technical. So this is how Maritime, the guys that we partnered with for the software side of things for the website, structured all the databasing. It's not anything I'm terribly au fait with, but I think key points there are it was very much a cloud-based system. It was geographically located sort of in the south coast of the UK, just so that latency could be reduced as much as possible. So if platforms are using it for live navigation, then it's as timely as possible in terms of accessing that data. And drawn up in a flexible way so that additional data types and sources can be added in there in the future. Because we hope for this to be able to be rolled out to either more locations and more data types, and we'll get into that side of things a bit later. But yeah, it was online. We had about 18 people actively using the API and about 50 plus using the dashboard and the sort of standard interfaces. Hopefully this is legible on your screens. It's a summary of the data that was pulled together into that system. So obviously our AIS data there at the top being the main one, and we had historical data from the MCA, so people could look at historical cases in terms of how busy a given sea route was for a given time, whether there is seasonality there, etc. That's pretty key in terms of that was one of the main requirements of the whole platform. But then we had the vessel movement side of things, so that was tied into the Portland Harbour vessel management system. So new arrivals and sailings, vessels in port, locations, etc., ETAs. And then also that then brought in advisory notices as well in terms of navigation zones, exclusion zones. So if there was a notice to mariner for a given location, if there was a sailing regatta within a region, then those polygons could be input by the port, and then that would come into our system. Because it's those sorts of ad hoc sort of activities that happen in ports. So trying to have that information all in a single place where people could always check it live was pretty useful. And then the various metocean data from the wind and tides and the 48-hour forecast as well in there that we went through. So I won't go through everything. I know it's quite detailed. And then the GA package. So this is from the UK Hydrographic Office. So there's a list of all the data that was in the system. I won't go through it all. But it does have that opportunity there, depending on the resolution for different locations. There's the opportunity there for subsea navigation using bathymetry, things like that. So if you've got subsea assets that are starting to use the contours for navigation or as a backup navigation, a lot of that information's out there, varying resolutions around the UK shorelines, but some areas obviously surveyed better than others. And that sort of runs through in terms of what was compiled, put together in terms of the data. And there's a link there at the bottom in terms of how to access all that data and how to implement it as well. So we've got worked examples for Python and MATLAB and a whole load of other codes to draw it out. And that was kind of what was delivered. The marlab.co.uk dashboard site is now down, so that finished at the end of May. So unfortunately that link probably won't work for you. But if you do need any more information on it, then as I said, do feel free to get in contact. And then following everyone's use of the data hub, for varying purposes. Some were looking at it from a planning point of view. Some of it were having a look with the guys that are looking at the sort of the more detailed side of things in terms of how they route and operate their craft. So how to integrate those API data feeds into their navigation systems, etc. So right across the board there. So that was really encouraging. But the main feedback that we got from everyone who were using it was they would like to see it, but more. So they would like to have more locations and more data types as a first sort of pass. But then ideally get to a point where there's integration there with other sectors as well. This is where you know, the RNLI is a good example. They've got sort of camera tracking software for counting swimmers in and out of the water, and there's definitely some crossovers there in terms of the collision avoidance and nearshore navigation side of things. Yeah, so that's sort of where we got to at the end of the sort of project. Funding ended at the end of March this year. The data portal was online to 2020, May this year. And yeah, we issued reports on all the stakeholder engagement, a whole load of feedback questionnaires, things like that, all back to the MCA, the data sources, data types, data availability, and gap analysis with data available versus what was required and where there were overlaps and gaps. So that's all gone back to the MCA at the end of March, early April. And that's all gone into their decision-making process. So that's now the next steps with all of this is MCA to take stock in terms of what they want to do. Certainly from a strategic point of view, the Minister for Shipping, who we met with, wants the UK to be very much at the forefront of all of this. So hopefully that means that we'll continue to see support from the UK government on this, because as I've mentioned on the previous slide, you know, all the stakeholders want to see this. But they want to see it as a free to access system. So that obviously comes with some challenges. But there's definitely that benefit across multiple stakeholders. So where a central UK or potentially international at a later date data hub would certainly be useful for quite a lot of users.